Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sona Shrestha from ADB, IED, and I'm very pleased to be moderating today's session. I hope everybody can hear me well. As you can see from the title, in this session, we will be exploring how artificial intelligence and machine learning tools are impacting evaluation. I think this topic has come up quite frequently in almost every session that I have attended, and especially during the keynote session with Tim Harford yesterday. So this probably doesn't need a lot of motivation or background information on why we think this topic is important. But we have an excellent set of panelists today here from the World Bank, EBRD, and ADB, and they will share their experience in utilizing these tools in terms of in conducting evaluation, as well as the important area of sharing evaluation knowledge. So let me very briefly introduce our panelists. Starting with Chris Nelson from IEG World Bank. Chris has worked in development for 25 years and is an expert on evaluation methods. And he has extensive experience in project evaluation, poverty research, and working in fragile states. His primary research interests are focused on the application of learning theories to development aid, agriculture, human chains, and organizational operations. Chris has been manager in IEG for the last 5 years and is responsible for the sustainable development and infrastructure portfolios. And before joining IEG, Chris also was Director of Evaluation in AusAid. Chris holds a PhD in Sustainable Futures and Evaluation Research from the University of Technology in Sydney and a Master's in Agriculture Development and Economics from University of Melbourne. So welcome, Chris. Next, we have Gabriele Fattorelli from EBRD. Gabriele is Director for Corporate Thematic and Knowledge Evaluation Products in EBRD. Which I didn't know, he's also an IT engineer with specialized expertise in IT services and AI, and an economist with extensive career in impact and results management in evaluation. Gabriele has 25 years of experience in Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. And he has worked across several MDBs in the area, MDB systems, as well as the OECD DAC. Gabriele holds a MA in economics from University of Padua, Italy, and an MA in economic policy management from the School of International Public Affairs of Columbia University. Welcome, Gabriele. And last but not least, for sure, we have Vijayaraghavan from ADB. Vijay is an experienced economist and an evaluator with a PhD in applied economics from Clemson University. Maya is currently the methods advisor in IED and has previously led several IED evaluations as well as capacity development initiatives. Before joining ADB, Maya was a civil servant with the US federal government, where she worked as a lead economist at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. And before that, Maya has also worked as an econometrician with the World Bank in DC. So welcome to you, Maya. A couple of words in terms of the session format. We will go straight to the presentations, and each panelist has about 10 minutes to go through their presentation. Then I will ask just a question or two to the panelists to kick off the discussions, but I really want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A from the floor at the end. So with that introduction, can I invite Chris, please, to start with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I've got my watch, so I'll make sure that I keep to time. It's really great to be here. It's one of those things that I probably have not done enough in the last 5 years. We all get extremely busy in regards to our working lives, and I think sometimes we get so saturated in the delivery aspect of our work that we fail to see how much you can get from having discussions with people about what they're bringing and how they're thinking differently about what they do. I must admit, I feel like a bit of a fraud being up here today, because I've got to say that our attempts at AI incorporation in the World Bank is pretty dismal. We have a couple of different tools, and it has a long history, I've got to say. I was talking to Harsh, who's also at the World Bank just a short while ago, about the fact that Jim Kim, who was a former president, brought in this science of delivery premise some years ago, and he introduced a science of delivery team. And one of the things that they began to work on is this notion of building an algorithm that is able to extract the necessary lessons that respond to particularly intractable problems in regards to delivering projects. So rather than it actually being a development thing, it was kind of an operational tool. Now, the way that that kind of played out was that then when a new task team leader was formulating a new design for whatever sector they were working in, they would get this little tab that would pop up on the operations portal within the institution, and it would have a bunch of lessons that had been extracted from across the institution for all the projects that aligned with what they were trying to do. And I remember having this conversation with a number of people over the past 3 years. I think it's probably now into the several hundreds of people. And I can happily say that of that several hundred people, 5 task team leaders know that that tab exists. So what I really want to talk about a little bit today is less on how we've used AI, but more a challenge to you guys about how we think about technology and the incorporation of technology in evaluation. My wife often gives me a hard time that, she said, well, nobody else is thinking about that at this time. And I will say no, but this is where it's so nice to have Gabriele here, because I think something was said this morning in regards to, we're moving away from being economists and needing to be IT specialists. And I think what struck me yesterday in Tim's talk was this resonance about the notion of mapping. And I think we never give sufficient credit to the importance of this in regards to evaluation work. Because I think, sure, the theory of change is a visual representation of what we intend to do. And we have various ways of influencing people that are delivering projects and our recipient partners, and it's a fundamental tool. But in many ways, there's a whole bunch of things that sit behind that is about mapping out how to get there. And so what I wanted to really talk about today is sort of some of the concrete examples of what we've experienced in regards to utilizing machine learning and to a lesser extent AI in regards to the World Bank's or IEG's work. Okay, so the fancy kind of representation here, there's a whole bunch of acronyms, of course, because that's what we're good at. But in effect, what I'm actually circled here on the right-hand side, which are all of the instruments that the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group utilize, there's 3 that really stick out that are fundamental. One, to my work, because I think I'm super upbeat about the role that they play. My primary responsibility is to the self-evaluation system. The ICRR is the Implementation Completion Report. That's the kind of standard project completion report that we complete. The Project Performance Assessment Report is a field evaluation. Now, we keep claiming that we're going to meet 20% field evaluations for the whole portfolio. We never get even close. It's around 2 or 3%, and even then we're kind of stretching the boundaries. But what's interesting is the field evaluations, in many ways, offer enormous opportunity for experimentation and engaging with different technologies and innovation. And then the last one is the synthesis, which I think has ebbed and flowed in its popularity within IEG. So many of you will know Alison Evans, who was our former vice president, was very, very keen on bringing this synthesis model into IEG. And her justification for that is very much aligned with my own thinking, which is, are we utilizing our data as well as we could? Are we getting it to the people that need it at the right time? And is it aligned to what they actually require to be able to do their job better? And I think this very much aligns with a conversation I had after the impact evaluation session this morning. It's thinking about what is the material and the information that enable people to do a better job at delivering development support and programs in various countries. So the reason I've got those there is because that's what I want to kind of sort of zero in on in a couple of concrete examples. On the left-hand side, you can see all of the different kind of roles that they play, and also the numbers that we actually complete. So obviously at the bottom, last year, 311 projects the World Bank completed. We did 311 completion reports, which is a lot, by the way. At the top, the synthesis part is primarily about extracting information from those reports and presenting it in a way that actually tells a bit of a story about what we're finding there. Okay. Oops, that's the wrong way, so let's go to there. All right, so the first example. We call this synthesis product an evaluation insight note. And we've got a session tomorrow morning on food security, and we were challenged by the agriculture practice as it was preparing for its global challenge program design to think about what can we see within the portfolio of food security projects that is interesting. So we went away and we utilized machine learning to go through a coding mechanism to better understand what were the key features of emergency food security response projects that were interesting and different from what people normally assume takes place within delivering food aid to different regions. Now, what came up in that process is this sort of question: how has the World Bank integrated resilience into food security operations? So what we did is we kind of did the pre-analysis on what the portfolio looked like by actually looking at all of the data that we actually draw upon in our ICR reviews. We have a portal that enables us to disaggregate certain portions of the report. So while it's not directly an AI function, it actually sets us up to really engage with particular parts of our regular reporting in a way that aligns with preparing the algorithm to be better at what it extracts. And I think the reason I say that is because we often talk about the notion of lessons. And I know that Maya's going to talk more extensively about how they're going through this at ADB. But what strikes me here is that I know, having cleared 3,500 or 4,000 ICRs over the last 10 years, that our lessons aren't great. And they're not going to give you solutions to intractable development problems. So what we actually need to do is be aware of the fact that AI can only respond to what we're actually putting in. Oops, again, wrong way. Okay. So in this process of utilizing machine learning, we went through the process of looking at all of the reports that were produced for food security, both in regards to design, in regards to completion reports, and in regards to any impact evaluations that were also done. And we arrived at this point of saying, okay, well, there's sort of five characteristics here that are useful in our own thinking about where food security sits. Now, again, there's nothing extraordinary here. I keep talking about, with my staff, about this notion of looking for aspects of difference. There's nothing that's not going to knock your socks off here. But what really struck me with this is that it was very apparent that any food security intervention that went beyond 3 years had a very significant improvement in its performance in regards to long-term, but also in regards to its actually project ratings. And so what we were able to do is kind of draw two things from this process of utilizing machine learning to kind of look at the text of our completion reports, look at the text of our completion report reviews, and then kind of see patterns, if you like. And it struck me as I was kind of writing this down today as well, that I think the one thing we bring to the AI landscape that people underestimate, and I think it is consistent with some of the things that Tim talked about, is we understand cross-disciplinary pattern recognition. And so very often AI is still at the point where it struggles with that. And so as evaluators, what I would really encourage you to do is to think about how we can take that on. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is this notion of how we can build the required architecture. And this, again, aligns with the IT component, which is, are we thinking about the management of our data and information in a way that lends itself to improving how we can utilize AI in the future. For me, that's the challenge. And I want to kind of just give you an overview of this architecture which we put together for our portal. And again, you don't need to read all of this. Why I thought it was important to actually provide you with an overview of it is that this model was what the data team in IEG worked with the completion report team in IEG to formulate and think about, if AI were to draw upon the information that we're regularly using, how do we ensure that that is actually consistent? How do we ensure that it is sufficiently rigorous? How do we ensure that the actual mechanisms are in place to regularly update and have it as recent as it possibly can be? And so the last point I will make, as I exactly hit 10 minutes, is that I think we often underestimate, in regards to AI, the fact that you've got to be thinking about the formulation of the algorithm. And again, Tim made the point the other day, we've got to be critical consumers. So my staff often refer to the fact that I'm known in IEG as a skeptical optimist. And I think what that means is that I'm very much the one that asks them the hard questions about, yeah, but is this truly a replication of exactly what the experience is? And the last thing I just want to touch here is I worked with Harsh on the coding for the machine learning for this particular evaluation insight node. And it was really interesting because the first cut on the data I looked at and I said to the two people that were working on it, I said, this is wrong. And they kind of stared at me and they said, well, why? How do you know that? And what really struck me is the reason that I know that is because I'm an evaluator and I spent 10 years looking at projects in the World Bank. And I think in that sense, that notion of skeptical consuming is a really important foundational element to how we think about incorporating AI and machine learning into what we do. So I'm going to leave it there and hand it back to Gabriele.
So much, Chris, for sharing your experience. I really appreciated the fact that you used very specific examples to illustrate the application of machine learning and focusing on the food security operations of the World Bank, which, as you mentioned, also happens to be the subject of the plenary tomorrow. Thank you. And Gabriele, next, please.
Actually, I think that whoever prepared my bios was far too generous. I have some IT technicalities, capabilities, but not really an expert. So, thank you very much, anyhow, for inviting us to present our journey, the EBRD journey and the Independent Evaluation Department journey towards this using this tool. Actually, my presentation will be even shorter than 10 minutes, really, because we are at the very beginning of a journey. So what I would like to really present is a bit the EBRD approach. As you know, EBRD is very much focused on the private sector. Around 77% of all our operation is on the private sector. And that has some implication around the use of artificial intelligence in our institution. Second, I would also like to touch a bit about what we have learned over the first 6 months of using this tool, and a special mentioning here to the chief evaluator of the EBRD, Veronique Salza-Lozac, who actually brought some good experience from the ADB EVA that Maya then will present. But more importantly, what I would like to share with you is about what we are planning to do next. I think that we are very much at the beginning of a journey collectively as MDBs, but in particular EBRD. So I think that there will be a lot that we can discuss together and find the synergies. So I just realized that it's not the right presentation, but that is perfectly fine. I will keep on going like if it is. But EBRD approach is to use artificial intelligence to basically add value. So we are not developing a new custom model. We are very much using the cutting-edge technology that is already available based on Chat GPT-4. And we really aim to use it to becoming more linear, producing outputs quicker, and cut the time cost of everyday task. Second, we aim to have a democratic use, we say, of artificial intelligence. We really leave to staff and to individual user to decide the use of AI that they can benefit the most. Still believing that, of course, humans are very much at the steering wheel of this tool. The third driver for us is, of course, the safety and integrity. That's why I mentioned the focus of EBRD on private sector. There is a level of confidentiality that is so important for us, and so we need to think very carefully about data access restriction and so on. The fourth element is the mitigation mindset, as we call it. So we have this approach believing that whatever can go wrong with the first use of AI, actually we believe that can get wrong. And this concept of garbage in and garbage out is actually very, very, very important for us. Let me go 1 second on the approach that we are actually using. So for the time being, we are in a very pilot phase. We have a very limited universe of around 1,000 data evaluation points spread throughout 150 documents. So it's very much a small universe. We don't rely yet on any deep learning, so no artificial neural networks or machine learning that can really indeed learn from experience. So we are very much at this stage. However, we have very much approached the issue in having a phase approach. And that brings me actually to what I would like to, more than this is what we have, we don't have a demonstration, very much what we would like to share in terms of the lesson learned, that what we have learned so far. So to one extent, we realize that artificial intelligence for us, it's very much at this time an instrument to synthesize our evaluation knowledge, to make that more accessible, and to find a way to share this knowledge with our key stakeholders. We are also at the point where we would like to expand our universe, including evaluation by management, as we call it, or self-evaluation, eventually validation of self-evaluation. There is a big question about quality control and a question about the governance of the tool itself, but it's something that I would like to discuss in this panel. We are also thinking about why not to expand this tool across the MDB system, right? So why we all, in a way or in another, are experiencing with these tools. We trust each other enough to some extent. So why not expanding the universe and putting together all our evaluation knowledge and make this tool available to all our staff? And in the end, we also hope that our board directors, for example, can simply create their own info notes or whatever they are looking for using our tool in an independent manner. In terms of, this is about the collaboration. So I just stop here by saying that there is a lot that we can share across MDBs. There is a lot that we can learn from each other. And I think that having already this discussion, it's so important to start having a very serious conversation on how to work together better on this issue. Thank you.
Gabriele, for sharing EBRD's journey. You mentioned that it's relatively early in the journey, but sounds like you've quite a bit of progress in a short time, and also you pointed out maybe some of the specific considerations in relation to evaluating private sector operations, which is what you EBRD primarily focuses on. So next, let's hear from Maya, who will share everything all about EVA.
Slight technical difficulty, I suppose. Okay, so I think you've heard this tool mentioned at least in a couple of previous sessions, especially the one just before this one. So this is a tool that the Independent Evaluation Department at ADB has developed in collaboration with the Information Technology Department. This is not something that evaluators can ever do on their own, and we really needed that level of technical expertise to get to the point where we are now. So I'll just, first I'll start with why we really need a tool like this. So you may recall this pyramid. It looks very familiar. It's actually very similar to the one that Chris presented. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it. Very similar setup. And so we have a wealth of lessons from all of these evaluations that we've conducted over several decades now, starting all the way from the project and the technical assistance level, which is the lowest level of, I'd say, disaggregation, going all the way through the sector evaluations, country program evaluations, evaluating thematic priorities, as well as ADB's corporate priorities. So there's a wealth of lessons that are embedded in all of these evaluation documents. But before we had this tool, it really was a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. We had hundreds of documents. They may have been in PDF format, but it still meant, it required a manual search of individual documents, and it was a very time-consuming process to find what you're looking for. And there are actually a number of types of users who look for these lessons. First set of users would be staff on the operations departments who are tasked with preparing projects. They would need project-level lessons to feed into new project preparation, and they may be interested in these lessons by theme, by sector, or by country. The second set of users could be evaluation department staff who may need these collection of lessons as inputs to evaluations that they're undertaking. And they would need a downloadable list of lessons. Again, they may want it by theme, by sector, or by country. A third set of users may not need the level of detail that was provided by a long list of lessons or something really specific. What they may be interested in is a very high-level summary, essentially a synthesis of the lessons from evaluations. So you have at least 3 sets of users. There may be more, but these are the ones that we were thinking about as we set about developing this tool. So what is EVA? Very briefly, it's just a new generation of enterprise search solutions. It uses AI technologies such as natural language processing and machine learning to ingest, that is, to get all the documents in, to understand, and this understanding is really in a statistical sense. It's not the same as human level of thinking or human type of thinking, and to organize, and then to query digital content from multiple data sources. In this particular instance, the multiple data sources are all those evaluation documents at those various levels. And if you use, this tool really helps us get very valuable insights from this collection of documents. It can really improve the efficiency of our work. And there's actually a lot that we can learn from these really quick outputs that we get from using these AI solutions. And I think there are opportunities to innovate, but we haven't quite gotten to that stage yet, but I'm hopeful for the future. So this isn't something that we developed overnight. Eva's journey has actually been a bit long. We started way back in 2021, about midway through the pandemic, with an ideation, really just brainstorming, and then outlining some core concepts and gathering stakeholder input. Yeah? And the very next step was just to develop a proof of concept, to make sure that this was actually feasible. And so we developed a small model, ran it on a few documents, and then established the proof of concept. That was in 2022. In 2023, we were able to develop a minimum viable product, which included some feedback from users. And we tested that for a long time. And that's the version, I believe, that Manny was referring to when he said, somebody said they just got the lesson and they populated their document for the project. And what happened between 2023 and 2024 was this explosion of large language models. I'm sure you all heard and used ChatGPT. There's a few others that are commercially available. So that made it much more feasible to actually undertake what we had initially started to do in 2021. But just having these models available made it much, much easier. So ADB in 2024, earlier this year, actually developed an organization-wide workbench called ADB Genie. And that's actually a research assistant that sort of gives you access to all ADB documents that are published on the ADB website. So that's sort of trusted sources. And that's the workbench that's being used for all AI applications that are under development at ADB. So we actually have a test version of EVA that our staff have been using. They've given us some feedback, and that's now being refined. So we hope to officially launch it within ADB sometime later this month. And it's going to have a few functionalities. First one is a lesson search, and then a further ability to chat with those lessons that are generated. And summarization, of course, which I mentioned, could be something that at least one set of users would be interested in. And there's also a feedback mechanism. This is really important because these tools have to be constantly refined to meet the expectations of users. There's an initial set of users with a set of expectations. Perhaps the current version meets their needs, but there may be other users interested in other things, other dimensions. They may pick up on errors that the current set of users haven't picked up. So having a feedback mechanism to really refine the model is very important. So that's part of the launch. So that's just a brief, I guess, at a glance on EVA's journey. Just, the point I'm trying to make is this isn't something that we developed overnight. It's taken a lot of time and effort and a lot of person hours, I'd say, from our staff, from the IT department, and very regular meetings and reviews. So just a little bit on the ADB Genie workbench. It actually supports 3 separate sets of language models. 2 of them from Anthropic, Cloud 3 Haiku and Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. GPT-4, which I'm sure most people in the audience have seen and used at some point from OpenAI, as well as Llama 3 that's offered by Meta AI. So actually the way I think of this is getting 3 different viewpoints on the same set of data. So think of it as 3 very efficient research assistants, each one giving you a slightly different take using the same set of documents. Very briefly, I'm not going to read every single thing that's on the slide, but just to give you a sense of what's included in EVER, it has documents from all those levels of evaluation that you saw on the pyramid on the first slide. So there's actually more than 55,000 evaluation documents spanning the years 1981 to 2024. So it's quite an extensive collection. Without going into the technical details, this is just a quick overview on how this tool works. First, the tool extracts text from all the documents and then uses a separate model to classify each of those blocks of tests into a lesson or not a lesson. So the ones that are lessons are retained, and all of those lessons are indexed. So the next step is data indexing, so you have this collection of lessons. And that's what enables us as users to search and then to also ask for a summary. So that's very briefly how EVER works. So you remember the 3 sets of users I mentioned earlier? So the first set would be staff who are tasked with preparing projects. From EVER, they would get a fully referenced project level lesson for use in new project preparation. This really goes back to the responsible AI practice that Gabriele referred to. You really need to be able to see where the data is coming from and to actually verify it yourself to make sure that it's actually accurate. Second set of users, evaluation staff, will get a fully downloadable, fully referenced, downloadable table of lessons, which they can analyze further. So that's for staff in our own department. The next set of users will get a fully referenced, high-level summary of lessons on trends, on what worked and what did not work. So I would imagine this to be perhaps senior management, could be the board of directors, could be someone outside ADB who's just curious about what works in a particular sector or in a particular country. So that's that. So what did we learn from testing EVER? We had all these staff tested. What did they tell us? So first thing we learned was it's very easy to use. So high ease of adoption, that's really important. I think Gabriele also mentioned that. Easy to use is one of the criteria for that. And we definitely see enormous potential for efficiency gains. Tasks that staff would spend maybe a week collecting lessons from various documents can actually be done, I'd say, with a click of a button now. Literally one question post to EVER, and you get the whole set of lessons. Download it, look through it, and then use the ones that you think are useful. At this point in time, we treat these tools as enthusiastic and efficient research assistants. So these are not professors. They are not highly skilled professionals who are going to give you something that's ready to use. But they give you inputs or outputs from the model that are really saving you a lot of time in actually gathering all of that information. So which gets me to the next point. We absolutely have to make sure that a human checks and confirms the output quality. So you may recall Tim Harford gave us the example of an HR department that had 3 separate arms. One group of people got no help from AI, one group got a little bit of help from AI, and the third group got a lot of help from AI, right? So the group in the middle did the best, and that's sort of where we are now. You keep the human in the loop to check and then to confirm the output quality. Last point is to continuously test and refine the tools. This is where the feedback mechanism that I mentioned earlier becomes really important. So that's all I have to share with you today. I think we're all ready to take not questions. I think Sona has some questions for us, and then we'll turn it over to you guys to ask us all the questions you have.
Thanks for taking us through the different stages of work on EVER. And after, as you mentioned, a lot of staff time and resources, it's great that it's ready for pilot launch across ADB. So as I mentioned, I want to make sure we have enough time for audience question. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest and questions to our panelists. But perhaps I can start with a quick clarification question to all of our speakers, starting with Maya. You know, you mentioned, well, all our speakers highlighted the huge potential of these tools. So going beyond the presentation about what stage EVA is at now, what are some of your thoughts in terms of how ADB, IED could harness and leverage the full potential of these tools going forward in the near to medium term? I know things are evolving very fast, so it's probably not possible to look too far into the future, but sort of in the near term, what you can share. Thank you.
Question. I think there's enormous potential to especially automate and to accelerate all these time-consuming tasks that staff have been doing. Anything that involves text analytics or text generation, I think if we use the tools efficiently, it's going to be an enormous time saver for sure. You know, especially for summarizing text data, extracting key information from text, and also analyzing and classifying. Recall I mentioned there's a classification model that we use for this to classify a block of text as either a lesson or not a lesson. So similarly, I think we could be using it if we have questions, perhaps if we are querying a portfolio, for instance, and I have a question, I'm sure we can post a question and use a classification model to actually write that. I think at some point we could also be using it for writing draft text, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So just my quick thoughts on potential future uses for this.
Thank you, Maya. If I can turn to Gabriele now. Sorry you didn't get a chance to do the demonstration of the chat box, but I know there's a lot of interest. So maybe you want to share some key features of your chat box. And also, if you could elaborate a little bit, you know, I was very struck by the point you made about how we could possibly link all the ECG database and evaluation findings, right? And that would be fantastic if we could do that. So any thinking in terms of what that might take, not so much on the technological aspects, but in terms of how our respective organizations, the evaluation departments could coordinate to make that possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sona, indeed, and apologies all for the wrong presentation. I must say, you should lost in the transfer from London to here. So basically, what I was mentioning is that we use ChatGPT-4, OpenAI. It's, as I mentioned, at a very early stage, so we have around 1,000 data points, which means evaluation findings, insight, lesson recommendation, and so on and so forth. Around 150 documents articulated more or less in the same way that both Chris and Maya shown. Not all, even now, IEvD's evaluation department staff have access to that. So it's really in a very pilot phase. The 3 steps that we would like to go through is, as I mentioned, to scale up by expanding the universe, so including self-assessment or evaluation by management. The second step would be to expand the user base, and I think that what you, Maya, presented is quite useful for us in the way that we would like to develop that. The final objective is that really our board directors can easily use this tool to get evidence in the decision-making process. And why I mentioned this, the importance of the board in this sense, to address your question, is because if you think about all the MDBs, to some extent, we share the same similar composition of stakeholders, right? So I think there would be a big value added in presenting, a big picture of what really works, what really does not. So a big evaluation picture, to And I believe that the EI, EIML, it's one of the tools that can really help us achieve that, right? So what we need to create, in my view, is a momentum, is to identify champions of this tool across our institution, and to work really together. I also can mention that very quickly, being at the very beginning of a journey, we are probably facing all the challenges that you guys have already faced. So I look at you with a sense of hope and for looking for some words of reassurance, because we are experiencing a number of tremendous issues in terms of technical issues, of course, including hallucination, that is one of the things that often happens, but also in terms of human-related challenges. We experience, for example, evaluators getting a bit impatient with using this tool when they don't get, what they expect, and in terms of the evaluation insights that they expect, or the evaluation synthesis they expect. But also, there is a lot of work and training required to, ensure that the information there are accurate. And this is a step that we cannot actually skip. And in the end, there are also a lot of resource-related issues, right? So I think that pulling together all our knowledge and our experience and creating a momentum can be really, a way to make this tool something really useful in the end for our ultimate beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you. So Chris, if I can turn to you next. You started your presentation with a slide on IEG's several products at different levels in terms of evaluation. So what opportunities do you see in terms of using AI and machine learning tools more broadly across your different types of evaluations and reports?
Thanks. So I think there's a bunch of ways that offers some potential. I think one of the interesting things that we have had within IEG for a very long time is a lessons database which people are able to access. Anyone out there, if they go to the IEG website, you have filters you can actually look at for all the lessons relating to social protection projects going back a very long time. So I think that the transparency that is already embedded in much of what the World Bank does inevitably means that much of what is incorporated into the completion report process is available and can be utilized using standard AI format. I think what stands out for me and where I see a really interesting kind of debate and conversation is around the third user interaction that Maya talked about. So when we're talking about this notion of trends, I'm fascinated to see what that would look like, particularly given that the database goes back to 1981. So do we want a bunch of trends from 1981 in regards to actually formulating what we're actually drawing from the system? I think what's interesting too is that when we've had a go at utilizing AI inside IEG for various functions, it's kind of been a little patchy. So I think for me, the really interesting part and where I think we've been more successful is on the machine learning side. I think our text analytics is actually pretty useful. And for me, that's where it's really stood out. And the reason I see that as so important is because however much the landscape might be frustrating to people that we deal in projects, and that's the unit of evaluation for many of us on a regular basis, what it does enable us to do is to understand that the kind of information that is in there is actually quite interesting, and that we're able to pick up on where projects talk about individual components or activities. So an interesting piece of work that we undertook when we were looking at an recent evaluation on the blue economy was this was a difficult topic because it's not a standard area. So as a thematic topic, it was kind of very broad ranging, and the portfolio included a huge number of things. So what we were particularly interested in on the machine learning side is what are the recurring themes that are being talked about with regards to blue economy issues across the full spectrum of all the global practices. And so machine learning became a really effective mechanism to pick up some of the things that are happening within that body of evidence to kind of say, all right, yeah, so infrastructure are beginning to think about the blue economy in a slightly different way, and this is how it actually plays out. So for me, I think we're kind of inching forward rather than actually going through a revolution. I know that when I prepare the presentations that I do all the time to regional directors and counterparts within the bank, we have invested very heavily in a data portal that gives me the information to actually point out the trends. Now, I always work from 2017. Now, the reason for that is kind of practical. That was when we went through a dramatic reform in terms of a completion report. And so it's a data set that also was the genesis of our portal. But I think for me, what's interesting then, in terms of actually identifying where the entry point is how we can use AI to build on the established platforms that are already there. And I think that's where what ADB seems to be a little bit further along on is something that I think all of us can learn on. Just to point out in terms of the opportunities for cross-collaboration, I know that I spend a lot of time working with Beata Leonard, who is our private sector micro-product person in IEG. And of course, we always confront the challenge of confidentiality in regards to the private sector. And so I think that is one of the really difficult things is, okay, so how much information is out there? And what do we expect from the curatorial approach that we actually take? And I think for me, that is a really interesting challenge. And maybe Gabriele might have some points on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. So I think we're doing quite okay with time. Let me open up the floor for questions and answers. If you could please raise your hand, identify yourself, and also if you're addressing the question to a specific panelist, please mention that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabriele. I was originally with the Asian Development Bank. I'm now retired, but I do some consulting work with ADB. As I listen to all three of you, to be honest, there's a sense of dread, and I'll tell you why. All of this is predicated on the fact that what AI is doing is capturing what's already in there. And what's already in there is stuff that people have put in. And that's garbage in, garbage out. And I had a sense of that when I was with ADB, but now that I'm actually doing some work for a different department within ADB, where we're looking at about 800 or 900 technical assistance completion reports. And this is probably directed at Maya because you'll be able to relate to it. Because you said there are technical assistance completion reports that are in EVA. Are they the validated reports or the ones that are actually done and not validated? That's the first question. If they're not the validated ones, then you'll be surprised to see any number of TACRs, the completion reports, where the validator has said, this is not a lesson. I kid you not, there are many, many times when the validator says, this is not a highly successful project, it's a successful one because the lessons have not been articulated properly. When the validator says this is not a lesson, and the AI then captures this as a lesson, and then we take that and we circulate it and use all kinds of things and come up with a product that says these are indeed the lessons, then I think we're really taking garbage and spewing out garbage. And that's worrying. If it's happening I'm looking at technical assistance report from 2017 to 2024, Lord knows what's happening out there prior to 2017. And so we're working with a database that is actually quite faulty. And I'm saying that because the IED itself has said it is faulty. It's not me that's saying it. I'm looking at the validated reports. I'm looking at the actual completion reports. So is my dread justified? Or is there a way in which we're now going to be coming up with a more refined way of saying, no, AI will take care of all of that? That's the question. Thank you.
Yes, we take maybe one more question and then we'll.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Cristiano Rossignoli. I'm the research lead at WorkFish on monitoring evolutionary impact assessment. I work extensively on artificial intelligence, and I'm aiming to work more on machine learning. So we set up a team, and we are basically replicating whatever you're doing on smaller scale, focusing on aquatic foods. So you know, I share with you a lot of concerns, and as well as I have a lot of questions to myself that I would like to pose to you, at least one. I think at the very moment, we are in a process of verification of data, and where fair principles are like findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, right? So the problem is we have a lot of stuff and we don't know how to use it, and we are trying to make sense of it through artificial intelligence. And I think it's a good thing, despite there are risks there, because the risk is, I think, what Christopher was mentioning about how we build the algorithm. We can fit in a lot of bias that we are intended to put there, and we will discover after 20 years, oh my God, I made a huge mistake. That's the risk there, right? However, I want to ask you a slightly different question, because I pose this question to me every day. World Bank, ADB, EBRD, and many, many others are coming out with their own models, right? And there is a lot of money spent there. And the question is, how you see the future? I mean, this system, or this proliferation of system trying to make sense of data, is sustainable? And are we probably needing some coordination about those efforts? Because I think if we are looking, I mean, not just from the single perspective, but as a global good, this is something that we should do it probably in a different scale.
Do you mind if we let them, yeah, and then I'll come to you, Marie. So it looks like both the questions were not necessarily targeted at any particular panelist, right? So I'll give
First one was to me.
To you? Okay, great. But so I will let Maya respond, and then others can also react to that question and also to the second question.
Okay, thanks, Gambir. Excellent question. So I have to tell you something about the way the lessons are picked up by EVA. So it's not, it doesn't just go into the document and pick up the lessons from the lesson section. You remember I talked about a classification model? So many person hours went into teaching EVA to recognize a lesson. And if something wasn't worded properly, it was annotated, so it read like a lesson. So what EVA does, at least at this point in time, is scans the entire document. It's quote-unquote a cognitive full-text search, and it picks up lessons not just from the section labeled lessons, but from anywhere else in the document where there is something that is described that looks like a lesson, but is not reflected in the lesson section. So that's the answer to the first question about, garbage in, garbage out. And of course, what's in the document is what EVA is going to pick up. If they're poorly written, it'll try and, sort of rewrite it a bit, but garbage in, garbage out, that's not something that we can do anything about. But all of it has been trained on ADB data sets. So in that sense, I suppose there's one source of bias that's been removed. It's trusted sources. So we have a bit more confidence in the model, that it's not biased in the sense that it's not picking up on something that's institutionally, unacceptable. So that's the answer to that. So the completion reports and the validation reports, it has both. And again, because of the way the classification model works, it doesn't matter if the content in the lesson section are not really lessons. It'll try to rewrite it or search through the entire document to find other instances where there is a lesson embedded in the document.
I will try to address both questions with one concept. So Gambir and the question about the garbage in, garbage out, but also the coordination. I think my views is that deep learning is actually one of the answers. So deep learning as a subcategory of machine learning based on artificial neural network, enabling a learning process and then enabling the machine to recognize patterns and make decisions, like a sort of a human brain. So we are not at this stage yet, of course. I don't know exactly if you employ this type of thing, but it is a way that I see for also enhancing the coordination among us. And having this deep learning embedded in our tools in a real near future can be a way really to work together on this. And avoiding the tagging, which is extremely, of course, resource intense, although for the time being probably the most useful solution. Thank you.
So I have a couple of things. So dread, is it justified? I don't think it is. I mean, I think building on what Gabriele is talking about, for me, the shortcut to the more interesting in-depth conversation is where AI, I think, really has an advantage. So if we get closer to the mechanisms giving us and identifying elements of what is included in these documents that actually forces us to the edge of asking hard questions, then to me that's the fast track to getting somewhere. And I think for me, the portfolio review in IEG and the World Bank was this enormously laborious process. It still continues to be. But what tends to happen is because people invest so much time in that notion, they begin to fall into the trap of description. And so they're not looking at the patterns as contestation. And I think for me, what AI is very good at is that it kind of raises this issue for me of how is the algorithm working? You know, why am I staring at the things that are coming up on my screen? This doesn't make sense for who I am and how I've been using the computer. I often give sessions with some university students in Washington. And I often say to them, how many of them consider that the 4th or 5th page of their Google search is actually where the sweet spot is? And I think that kind of questioning aspect is the one that's really important. But I think that AI can often get us there faster. And so I think in that sense, I'm relatively optimistic about that aspect. On the garbage in, garbage out, we can do something about it. And I'm an enormous believer that the quality of the completion reports within the World Bank in the last 11 years that I've been responsible for this is infinitely better. And we have a whole bunch of tricks that we've imposed, one of which was an idea Marie had, which was to have a little tab that when we downgraded a project or took a project below the line, we have this tab that pops up and it says, are you making the judgment on the basis of lack of evidence or because the project performed badly? Now, what that begins to do is that it challenges us to push on the institution to get better at telling the story and meeting the evidence thresholds. And I've got to say that senior management within the bank, particularly at regional director level, have been really great at pushing this. You know, they've set up development effectiveness units. They really take a lot of ownership of the ICRs. And possibly the one reason why that is because it is the one thing that is their sole responsibility and management oversight. So it's the only thing they own. And I was kind of skeptical when it was handed to them, but it's made a big difference. So for me, I think in that sense, it's really important. On the over-investing, I do think we need to spend more time in doing what Maya outlined in regards from 2021, which is what are the incremental steps that we can chip away at that actually makes the difference? Because the more that you invest in the user interface, the more that you think about what works, what doesn't, and why, that really makes a difference. And I think that I'm just to touch on one concrete example, the other thing that we've used machine learning for recently is in an assessment of technology and how it's been applied within agriculture projects. And I remember going to the Agriculture Week, which was the Global Practices Show and Tell, and virtually constantly, for the first day and a half, everyone talked about how much technology and innovation was in their projects. And I've got to say, I was kind of skeptical. So we went back and we did a synthesis and we looked at the whole portfolio, and frankly, there's no technology in the portfolio. And then we knew that everyone was going to say, well, what about the active portfolio? So then we looked at the active portfolio as well, and again, it was extremely limited. And so in that sense, machine learning became a very, very efficient way of getting to a question that's coming up in conversation.
Marie, please, I know you had a question earlier.
Thanks. So I share some of the skepticism, but I want to come at it from a slightly different tack. And so, Chris, you talked about how you had seen those 3,000 ICRRs, and so you sort of know what they're saying and what's in there. And you know, in the past, we've done impact evaluations where with evidence briefs and looking at how people update their priors, and people who have strong priors and strong knowledge are the ones who usually don't update their priors. And so I was wondering whether, to what extent, you know, and you said, okay, so you knew that the first take you had that came out of using ChatGPT or machine learning, I forget which one, what you used, machine learning. So you said that was wrong. But in fact, maybe this is something that you should have engaged with as a, you know, a way of triangulating. So I was thinking about, you know, at what point do we use this not as a tool that we need to control, and at what point are we where we actually see it as part of a triangulation? You know, this is a part of a triangulation exercise that makes us revisit and rethink and question maybe some of our priors. And then to Maya, thanks for excellent introduction to the EVA. And one of the big things I'm fighting for is that whenever you do a tool, you know, introduce a tool or a reform in the banks, for example, where you want, you know, in order to improve use of evidence, right, which is what this is, you get to test it. And I think you talked about some of the testing, but at least I didn't catch that you actually do, for example, A/B testing. And I wonder whether, I mean, I saw September 2024, so I was like, wow, this is like, you can still do some of this. And if you can't do A/B testing, you could do encouragement design, for example, to TTLs, and then see some, you know, randomly, and you could see to what extent does that change anything in terms of the use. But of course, then you have to look at, you know, down the line, does it actually change anything in the design, as opposed to just being a tick the box of putting something in the background section to please the beast kind of thing. So, you know, but really an important opportunity to do that, and I think maybe not yet too late. Thanks.
Yes, please.
I am Arpudaswamy from Niti Aayog, India. I understand that whatever studies are already done, from there we pick up the lessons. And AI or machine learning, how it will help if there is a project which has to be evaluated. In that case, to develop the questionnaire or evaluation model or things like that for a new project which is implemented. In that case, whether this AI will be useful or helpful in framing the methodology.
Can we take one more question? Any more questions? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Great, so perhaps I can ask Chris to respond to Marie's question, and also Maya, and also any one of you for the second question.
Thanks, Marie. So I think for me, the wrong is not necessarily avoiding or turning my back on triangulation. I think it was more an awareness of that the undertaking of the coding was incorrect. So we were effectively utilizing a whole bunch of text, words, phrases that then imposing upon all designs within the agriculture portfolio, and we were coming back with 2 and 4 and these numbers that were completely unrealistic. And so in that sense, it was more about knowing what most designs look like was a trigger for understanding and being aware of the mistakes that we were making at the sort of the front end. On the triangulation and the utilization of machine learning more broadly, I think there is a great opportunity to kind of expand the notion of amplified triangulation and throwing up questions that maybe we were not ordinarily looking for. So for me, that's really where an enormous amount of the value comes. I think the vigilance and the thing that I keep pushing people to pay attention to is that if we're to get what we really want out of the actual synthetic sort of collection of material, we've got to keep pushing on making sure that the rigor and the actual process itself is solid. And so, again, I mean, there's another conversation we had. So we have done the double-blind assessment of all our validations across departments within IEG to test out if you get 3 people, you take out the ratings, you give the description, the narrative to those 3 people, do they come out with the same results? And it's kind of like a qualitative test, if you like, of, are we articulating well what the project achieved? And it was surprisingly good. So there were some weak spots and some soft spots in regards to the overall portfolio. But I think for me, that really stands out. What we can then do is presume that whatever is in there is at least pointing out what many task team leaders or project leaders found was problematic in regards to rolling out their project or what really worked. So I do think the triangulation thing is really where the value is. But at the same time, yeah, you also, I don't know, I want to embrace the tools, so it's more a case of just being a little skeptical going in so that you can actually extract the most that you possibly can coming out.
Murray, I'm guessing your question is on the technical side of things, on A/B testing of the model. Yes, so I believe it was in 2022 when we were past the first phase, where I guess we sort of established the proof of concept. For the minimum viable product, we actually had a training data set, and then we had a separate test data set, and we did run it, and then checked all the specs. I don't have the details at this point, but we did do that. No, not yet with the users. I think so what we got from the users is just general feedback, on whether the outputs from the tool actually made sense and if it was useful for their work. But we don't see this as sort of the end. This really is a start. This is when we're releasing it officially to the users. And the feedback that we get from that, I think, is what's going to help us refine it further. But yeah, I just see this as a start of the journey forever as a product. It's not the end. It's not going to be done and dusted. It's something that has to be constantly refined based on feedback from a user. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's part of the plan. Yeah, so as for the second question, at this point in time, I don't think with EVER as it stands today, that level of sophistication is not feasible. But I think some of the language models, if you use them with some good prompt engineering, you should be able to get some help with those tasks that you described.
Thank you, Sona. This is Gonzalo Gomez, sorry, from UNDP, Independent Evaluation Office. We had a similar journey as Maya was saying. Tomorrow there is another session on the ethical use of AI, so I will be presenting part of the journey that UNDP did with AIDA. I'm using this space as inviting you to go tomorrow. But we did basically the same, right? We are tapping into existing evidence and how to learn from it. But have you experienced any other things on other stages of the evaluation, like data collection, not only summarization that we are doing? Because, for example, we were testing one tool that is doing interviews instead of doing surveys, right? Where you put the questions and this AI tool generates a video of the person that can basically interview you instead of collecting the data through a long questionnaire. But we were playing with it. And I think we need to embrace what is coming, because this if we don't jump into this train, we will be way behind the world that is implementing the projects. But I'm curious if you experience with other tools beyond what you can do in-house with the machine learning or AI. Thank you.
It up? Well, I'd say not yet, except in a very small way. I'd say maybe in using co-pilots for meeting summaries. That's sort of the extent to which we've used it in-house beyond the summarization. But yeah, I see a lot of potential, but I think it also has to be accompanied by sensitization of staff who are not really exposed to these tools and emerging technologies. I think that basic sense of literacy has to be perhaps started first before we could start using it more extensively.
Thank you. Actually, we are at the very beginning of a journey, but we are thinking all this potential use of AI ML in the project cycle of evaluation, starting from, of course, our conceptualization of our evaluation, potential use in data collection. We were trying to experience something like that in terms of interviewing rather than delivering a survey. And also, interestingly enough, in a sort of evaluation of our own evaluation work, which is quite interesting. I think something that evaluators should get more used. Thank you.
So, I think it kind of depends a little bit on how much of a handle we have on what we're expecting from the interaction. So, I think if you were thinking about collecting data from an interview process utilizing AI, I think it could be a good way of avoiding interview bias. On the flip side, there is also an aspect of skill that is brought into the importance of prompts. And so if AI is able to embrace that notion of multi-level prompts as a basis for doing its interviews, great, then maybe there really is an opportunity there. But at the moment, I'm kind of a little bit concerned of also what is the necessary stimulus for your own thinking with regards to how you then frame what you're actually going through the process of evaluating. And so, again, I think if you're wanting to be more divorced from the information that you're collecting, and there's an emphasis on that, that's fine. But I also believe that the deep learning that Gabriele talked about before can be lost if we actually don't involve ourselves in that exchange of information, that you're not actually in a position where you're able to do the filtering. And so that would be, I think, the risk that I point out there.
See any hands up, so perhaps we can conclude this session. Thank you so much to all the panelists for this really, really interesting exchange and conversation. It was a very rich discussion, so I probably won't be able to do justice in terms of summarizing the entire discussions and the topics that we covered in this session. But if I may just reflect on a couple of highlights, at least the takeaways for me. In terms of the shared experience and the journeys, I think our panelists we're quite optimistic in terms of the potential of using AI and MI tools, machine learning tools in evaluation, certainly in terms of the extraction of the evaluation knowledge and finding, but also possibly across the evaluation cycle. But many of you also, I think, highlighted the importance, maybe, as much as there's potential, but also the importance of approaching this with the healthy degree of skepticism, and be aware of some of the risks you have all highlighted. And we also learned that this process and the journey is actually quite gradual, and a couple of you highlighted the importance of continuous feedback and to continue to improve the model in relation to the needs of the different users. So in that sense, perhaps this is more of an evolution as opposed to the revolution, as mentioned in the title. But once again, please join me in thanking the panelists for this really, really interesting discussion. So a quick request, I think you have the QR codes in front of you at your desks. So we very much appreciate your feedback, really appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes to fill in the survey. Thank you again, and have a good rest of the evening.